Okay, so come back with me to the beginning of the book of Genesis, and we'll work our way here through. The end of the book of Genesis, let's go here first. The end of the book of Genesis is going to end with which major character? And hint, we're talking about him this morning. Joseph, okay. So, step back with me to the beginning of the book of Genesis. Let's hit who are our high water characters, okay? Obviously, Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, we are focused on whom? Adam and Eve. Okay, so let's move forward from there. Who are our other kind of high watermark characters? We got Noah in Genesis 6. Then we've got Abraham starting in Genesis chapter 12. From Abraham, we're going to go to Isaac. From Isaac, we go to Jacob. And from Jacob, we go to Joseph. There we go. So those are not the only people in the book of Genesis. Those are not the only people we need to focus on. But when we're talking about the notable story moments in the book of Genesis, and the ones that tend to really reverberate into the New Testament, those are really the ones that we're looking at. You see paragraph 1 following Abraham. Moses is going to focus on Jacob and Esau. Jacob's name is going to be changed to Israel. That's, of course, going to be notable. That's going to be the covenant people that descends from Abraham. What does the name Israel mean? Wrestles with God, struggles with God, fights with God, yes. Jacob is going to have the 12 sons of note, right? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Joseph, Benjamin. These are the 12 sons of Jacob. Yeah. We all remember the little song. If you don't remember the song, Ryan will teach it to you later, all right? So just come up to him and he'll run through that with you. So Joseph is really going to be the key figure through the rest of the book of Genesis. His story is really going to pick up in earnest, or at least being introduced to us, back here earlier in the book of Genesis, but from chapter 37 onwards, really we're going to be focused almost solely on the development of the life of Joseph. In Genesis chapter 37, this is where we're introduced to him in earnest, where what happens? What happens in Genesis chapter 37?
Tells his brother the dream.
I've had a dream, and I want you guys to listen to my dream. And what was the sum and substance of his dream? I'm going to be great, and you guys are all going to what? You guys are going to bow down to me, and as we get into the next dream, it's not only you guys that are going to bow down to me, it's also whom?
Mother and father.
Mom and Dad. Mom, Dad, and all you guys are going to bow down to me. Now, how is this going to go over? Going to go over like a lead balloon. Why is this going to go over so poorly?
Because he's way down the line.
He's like the youngest.
One of the
He's the youngest.
He's the favorite too already.
He's the favorite.
He's the favorite. Is he the youngest?
He's
Benjamin is the youngest.
One of the youngest.
He is the next to youngest. That's right. What'd you say, Rod?
At this point, he may be the youngest.
Yeah, at this point he may be the youngest. You were correct about that. At this point he may be the youngest, depending on when Benjamin comes on the scene. What else makes Joseph so unique within the band of the brothers and a target for ire? What'd you say, Sister Bonham? Favorite of his father. Why was he a father's favorite?
Favorite of his mother.
And who was the favorite wife? He is the son of Rachel. Remember, this goes back to our story of Jacob. Remember, Jacob works, 7 years? And he hopes to marry whom? Rachel, and get to wedding day, and surprise, surprise, you didn't get married to Rachel, you got married to Leah, and now you're going to have to work 7 more years to be able to earn the right to be married to Rachel. We see, and we just might note this very quickly, we see again in the story of Joseph a lesson to us as parents about what? Playing favorites with our kids. Has that ever worked well anywhere in Scripture? All right? Now, this is not the focus of our lesson, but just work with me for a moment here. How might we play favorites with our children today? I mean, it is good and well for us to go, hey, when I look at the life of Abraham, when I look at the life of Jacob and Esau, I look at the life of Joseph, we learn these lessons that we don't need to play favorites with our kids. Well, that's good and well. What does it look like to play favorites with our kids? I'm not saying how did you fail as a parent by playing favorites with your kids. And I'm not asking you to think about someone else in the congregation and be like, you know what they did? Okay. Just think through, how is it that we might do our children a disservice by showing favoritism?
You need to be more like your brother or sister.
We need to be careful with the way we talk to our kids, right? You need to be more like your brother or your sister. That might be a comment that we make very innocently as parents, trying to point out the good example of one child when to another child's mind that might be what? Well, why does dad love him or her so much and not me? All right. We need to be beware of what are innocent comments to a fully developed mind that a child's mind may not be able to sort through and process. Very good. What else? Michael?
It could be just like Cain and Abel, when God actually decided one way was better than the other. It's like if you don't show equal and on things, one will actually decide that the other is going to get beaten up or something.
Okay. All right.
That's basically what happened.
Mike?
Just comparing children to each other in something, accomplishments, or their interest, or whatever they excel at. Make sure that they understand they're unique and individuals, and not going to be people that it's not a competition. Don't
Okay.
promote a competition.
That we need to treat our children perhaps as the individuals that they are. Maybe you had this same example growing up, but this is something I experienced. As I was getting into high school, I noticed that I got more spankings than my sister did. And I brought that up with my parents. I said, why, when I was her age, I was getting spanked all the time. Why doesn't she? Why don't y'all treat her the same way you treated me? Genius me at 15, really solving the world's problems here. And I'll never forget, my parents, instead of, pulling me by the scruff of my neck and really setting me in line, talked to me in a rather adult way that I was not used to at that time, and said, look, the way that you guys respond to things are different. You are two completely different people, and what works for you doesn't necessarily work for her. And that's not to say she didn't ever get a spanking or anything like that, but it is to say there were methods of correction that worked a whole lot better with her that wouldn't have done a thing in the world for me, right? And so being able to see our children as individuals and approach them within the boundaries of God's Word as individuals, I think that's a really good point to bring out there, Mike. What if we are... What is it in the story of Joseph that's really going to set off the ire of his brothers?
Multicolored tunic.
Yeah, Dad's going to gift Joseph something, and he gives the other brothers what? Apparently nothing, right? If we're going to gift something to a child, and especially one whose brain is not fully formed, and we're trying to work through all this, we need to make sure we're not leaving the impression that one person is getting something and the other person is being left out and being excluded and being identified as being something less than ideal or loved.
Just very quickly, the dyes to dye cloth were extremely expensive in those days.
This would not have been a cheap article of clothing.
This is a very, very expensive piece of clothing.
Good point.
The other guys didn't get it.
So just something to be thinking there. In chapter 37, the first dream is the sheaves that represent his brothers bowing down to the sheaf of Joseph. In the second dream, we've got the sun and the moon and 11 stars all bowing down to Joseph. We have this momentary interlude in chapter 38, the Judah and Tamar story, before we come back to Joseph. And in chapter 39, where is Joseph? He's in Egypt. So how in the world did we get from Dad's house to Egypt? And specifically, where are we in Egypt?
Potiphar's house.
We're in Potiphar. So how do we go from Dad's house to Potiphar's house? What happened? And Joseph is going to be sold into slavery. That's right. In Genesis chapter 37, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Israel, and who is Israel? Jacob. Jacob says to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come and I will send you to them." And he said to them, "I will go." Then he said to him, "Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring back word to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, "Who are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have moved them from here, and I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went with his brothers and found them at Dothan. When they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. And they said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer, and let us kill him, throw him into one of the pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams." Now, verse 21, somebody has a different plan. Who is it? Okay, what is Reuben's role in this whole order of things? He is the oldest. Okay? Realistically, everything that has been given to Joseph, if it was going to go to one of the sons, really should have gone to whom? Reuben. He is in line for a double portion of his father's inheritance. Normally, it is the firstborn who is going to be the apple of the father's eye. That's not been the case for Reuben. But Reuben comes up with a plan here. What's Reuben's plan?
Not to kill him.
Yeah, we're not going to kill him. Let's just throw him in the pit. And Reuben is thinking, what? I'll come back and get him out, and then I'll do what? I'll bring him to Dad. Dad, guess what? I saved him. And here's your son. And maybe, just maybe, what?
Dad will like me.
Dad will love me like he loves him. What a terrible thing for a child to work through, right? Says something about the dysfunction present in this family. Well, Reuben goes away for a little bit, and the brothers decide what? Instead of leaving him in the pit, we're going to do what? We're going to sell him. We're going to sell him into slavery. We're going to sell him to these Midianite traders. Now notice verse 24. Actually, verse 23. When it came, when Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now, I'm not trying to say that Joseph is scot-free and innocent in all of this. I think there's some blame to go around here. It's interesting, the word that is going to be used about the kind of report that Joseph used to bring back about his brothers. As that word is used all throughout the Old Testament, it's always a negative word. And so it seems to indicate that Joseph might have had a little bit of a busybody, tattletale aura about him. Here he is being sent by his father to go check on the welfare of his brothers. And Joseph shows up wearing what? Tunic. Now, to Jim's point about this tunic being really expensive, if that's the case, does Joseph probably have other tunics he can wear?
Yeah.
Probably so. And whether this was intentional or unintentional on his part, it's not very smart to go and check on your brothers, being the youngest, being the one that your father loves, and whether you intended it or not, you're doing what? You're flaunting the fact that Dad loves me more than you guys.
How old was Joseph when this was going on?
How old is Joseph when this is going on? I don't know for sure. I don't think the text tells us. I tend to think he is somewhere in the upper teens.
Well, during the dreams, he was said to be 17.
17. Mm-hmm.
Can
So,
the problems of the world fall on a 17-year-old?
sure.
How
Well,
do they handle it?
Yeah. Like I said, there's blame to go around here. I just don't think Joseph is this. We sometimes have this almost precious moments picture of Joseph. Remember those precious moments Bibles, right? We almost have this precious moments picture of Joseph. And I'm not sure that's the most accurate picture of Joseph. That I am not saying that Joseph is along the lines of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? But neither am I trying to say that Joseph is scot-free. Joseph is a 17-year-old. How many 17-year-olds do you know that live the most upstanding, 17-year-old boys live the most upstanding and godly life that you can think of, okay? Just maybe consider that there's a little bit more going on here. What do they do to Joseph? You ever try to make a 17-year-old boy do anything? Get in this pit. He says, what? I don't think so. How are they going to get him in this pit? They're going to have to throw him in here, right? They strip him of a tunic. They throw him into the pit. The pit was empty without any water, which means this pit is probably hard. Which means if you're going to throw somebody into what amounts to a well that would have been anywhere from 5 feet maybe to 10, 15, 20 foot deep, what's going to happen?
It's going to hurt.
Yeah, I remember teaching in a Bible class one time, fourth, fifth grade kid said, why didn't Joseph just climb out? I never really thought about that before. But if you're thrown into a deep, dry well, what's probably happened? You think you've picked up an injury? You think his brothers just very carefully, just gingerly lowered him into it? No, of course not. So he's probably injured. He's probably scared. Why in the world are my brothers doing this? And then perhaps the cruelest thing in all of this, verse 25, what do they do after they put him in the pit? It's picnic time. Right? Do you catch that there in verse 25? Then they sat down to eat a meal. Here is Joseph, broken ankle, broken ribs, hurt, injured, twisted knee. No clue what's about to happen to him. The brothers don't even really seem to know what's going to happen to him, except, hey, he's down in the pit. Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate. What's up, Jim?
If the price of a slave was 30 pieces of silver, they only got 20.
So, they end up selling him to these Ishmaelite traders. New American Standard Bible says Ishmaelite. If you're reading from a different translation, it's going to say Midianites. Very good. The Ishmaelites are also called the Midianites. These are descendants of Ishmael, Genesis chapter 16 and verse 12. And they are eventually going to sell him on to Egypt, and he's going to end up, verse 36, the Midianites sold him into Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer and the captain of the bodyguard. So Joseph is going to be installed as a servant in the home of Pharaoh. He's going, not Pharaoh, and Potiphar rather. He's going to work his way up in the pecking order in Potiphar's house, all the way to what point? Yeah, he is second in charge, second only to Potiphar himself, right? Joseph himself is going to admit that when Potiphar's wife tries to be immoral with him. In verse 8, Genesis 39 and verse 8, behold with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in his house than me, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, Potiphar's wife. Because you are his wife, how then can I do this great evil and sin against God? Verse 10, she spoke to Joseph day after day. He did not listen to her to lie beside her or to be with her. All right, so this is not just a one-time or a two-time thing that happens. This is a woman who is persistently trying to come on to Joseph. In verse 12, she finally finds an opportunity. She tries to get Joseph to be immoral with her. She grabs at his garment. He flees. She's got his garment in hand, which she's going to paint into this picture of what? He tried to assault me, right? Potiphar hears this. He is going to consent to what his wife said, and Joseph is going to be put into prison where the king's prisoners are confined. He's here in the jail. But in verse 21, we're reminded by Moses of what reality? God is still with him. God has been with him, as we see clearly through this whole story. It's expressly mentioned here. He is given favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. So we have seen Joseph demonstrate a character of responsibility, haven't we? He's been given that role by Potiphar. He's given that role here by the jailer.
I wonder sometimes if Potiphar didn't have an idea about his wife.
Sure.
Because I'm thinking if a Hebrew slave truly tried to attack my wife, that I would have him killed.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if, and you know, that also could have been the Lord's intervention because his plan was not for Joseph to die, but
Could have been. Could have been. Jim?
You know, there's another little historical thing. One of the comments here says that Potiphar was chief of the executioners, which is into it. Could have several different duties.
Sure.
Also, some say that he was a eunuch. Eunuchs, it was not unusual for them to marry because they, for whatever social purposes, they needed a wife to run the household or something. But that would explain a few things.
Yeah.
Josephus says, of course, he liked to embellish things, said that Joseph was such a good-looking guy, all the women in the higher-up levels of the government thought he was just so cute. Anyway.
There are a number of different possibilities.
There are a lot of
what's going on
possibilities.
here. That's right. A lot of theories. Mike?
verse 9 always stuck with me about the fact that he said, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? That's always stuck with me is when we sin, we are sinning against God.
Ultimately.
Sometimes that that's always the case, okay, when sin is involved. Sometimes we think we sin against others or we sin against
And we might, but first and foremost.
But it's always God.
Absolutely.
You're sinning against God.
Sam?
Sorry for backing you up.
No, go ahead.
Is there any indication what had happened to Reuben? Because you mentioned how Reuben had stopped him from killing. In verse 25, verse 22, he's there, he's convinced him not to kill.
Chapter 37, verse 22.
Right. And then when you drop down to verse 29, you see that Reuben returns. So somewhere between the time that he stopped him from killing him, it looks like he separated himself from them.
Right.
And they went about this thing without him having knowledge of it.
Right. This selling him off, right. Reuben is not a part of that, right. Was he out tending the flocks, perhaps? Was he going after some that went astray? Was he acting in a way that was suspicious, which is why the father sent Joseph out to check on them in the first place? You know, I don't know. I wish I had more answers to that. I think that's an insightful question. He is not there. For whatever reason, his lack of presence means Joseph is not protected in the way that he had envisioned. And so his scheme falls to pieces. But I think the point that we see in all of this is that even as all of these schemes rise and fall, who is able to work out through all of this? God is, right? And this, in fact, is going to be the statement that Joseph is going to make. Remember, at the very, very end of the book of Genesis, you all meant it to me for evil, but God meant it for good.
I keep wondering, where did he get that faith?
I think that's a good question.
We went through the study about Abraham and talked about the progression of Abraham's faith. There's a similar progression in Jacob's faith.
And Joseph.
Starts out, yeah. And then in Joseph, you see the same kind of
Yeah.
thing. Where did he get that?
Best I can tell, it's going to be from his family.
Yeah.
Which can tell us that families, it paints a realistic portrait of family life, doesn't it?
The mothers, though, it was Rachel who stole the family idols.
Yes, it is.
But when you go through and look at
yeah.
what Leah did, each child was named in relation to God.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like she was the more religious of
Very
the
well could
two.
have been.
And there's another interesting story, you may get to it sooner or later. When Rachel died, he buried her where she was.
Uh-huh.
Even though it was only about a day's journey to the family burial plot.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, when he is about to die in Egypt, he says, take me back there where he listed, you know, Abraham and Isaac were buried and where I buried Leah.
Yeah. Good point.
Tyler, I'm sorry.
Sam, go.
Yvonne had it.
Yes, sir.
I was going to say, you know, after so many dreams, it has to affect your way of life.
It has to.
So I think, you know, that's what he referred to. He probably had very clear in his mind because of the frequent dreams. You know, it didn't give him the air of grandeur. You know, it's kind of strange that, you know, he mentioned the dreams because you have to. It repeats itself. But, you know, I think that's what provides him that initial thrust, you know, to be on the blessed side of life.
And if God has communicated to him by means of these dreams and visions, what more might God have said to him that simply goes unrecorded in Scripture that could help again explain where this faith develops and where this faith grows from, circumstances from which it grows.
Tyler, you got a question back there?
One thing I found interesting is he wouldn't have had these opportunities to kind of advance and become more, his skills as far as managing things and overseeing things if he wasn't sold into slavery, because, you know, he's sitting there at home at 17, not even out there with his brothers with the flocks where he should have been. You know, he's kind of being pampered and babied at home, but, you know, being separated from that, put into a different environment, he was able to grow and evolve and mature, you know, of course with God's help and everything else, but he won't have had that opportunity unless that took place.
Yeah, and that's kind of a theme that we see, I think that we need to pick up on throughout all of the Old Testament, is that so many of these Old Testament characters that we focus so much on and are praised, for example, in Hebrews 11, for being these great bulwarks of faith. Many of them don't become that without going through times of hardship and difficulty first. And so I think back, for example, to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who don't know if they're going to be delivered from the fiery furnace. And in fact, they say as much to the king. We don't know if we're going to be delivered, but if not, you know, our God, we're not going to bow down and serve you, king. They come through the fires unscathed. Knowing the end of the story from the beginning, would they have done anything differently? I don't think so. If you knew God was going to bring you straight through that, would you? No. But aren't we glad, even though they didn't know the end of the story from the beginning, that they maintained the faith that needed to be there no matter what? And what a remarkable story that is. And perhaps that's a lesson we need to draw from the life of Joseph, that no matter the difficulties we find ourselves in, the answer is never what? The answer is never abandon faith and walk away from it. God is with Joseph in all of this. And he's bringing Joseph to something better. And as Christians, we have the promises that if we serve God faithfully, if we give him our hearts, if we maintain faith, he will bring us to something better. Not necessarily in this life, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego understood, but whether in this life or in the life that is to come.
Potiphar must have seen something in Joseph, or he certainly would have killed him.
Fair point. So keep going here. While he is in prison, he's going to meet two different men. Who are these men that are imprisoned with him? The butler, baker, candlestick maker didn't make it. And we're here with the butler and the baker. They each have dreams. Joseph is able to interpret the dreams. Again, here is God working through Joseph, and certainly Joseph would have, it seems, would have some sort of an awareness about that. In verse 21 of chapter 40, the chief cupbearer is restored to his office. The chief baker is hanged, just exactly as Joseph had interpreted the dreams. He told the chief cupbearer, when you're restored to your place, remember me. For several years, 2 years in fact, he doesn't remember him. Joseph is languishing in prison. Until Pharaoh has a dream, this dream needs to be interpreted. The chief cupbearer remembers Joseph. Joseph comes, interprets the dream, sets this plan in motion, and eventually works his way up to what position? Once again, second in command, right? Second in command in all of Egypt. And from this position, he is going to do what?
Start preparing for these foods.
He's going to prepare food because of this famine that is coming. This famine is coming upon whom? Whole world.
Large section.
This is a famine that is coming upon the whole world here. And so, Genesis chapter 42, when this famine is raging throughout the world, you have Joseph's father, Jacob, is going to send his brothers to Egypt to buy grain. Notice, if you will, Genesis chapter 41 and verse 56, just to establish this point. When the famine was spread all over the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all of the earth. So everyone from all over the earth is coming here to Egypt. They've heard that Egypt has prepared for this. They have grain. Jacob hears about that, so he's going to send his sons. They don't know it. They're going to come into the presence of Joseph. This happens a few times. Ultimately, Joseph is going to reveal himself to his brothers, and instead of taking vengeance on them, he's going to do what? He's going to what? He's going to have compassion. He's going to bring them back, and not only them, he's going to bring whom? All of his family here to Egypt, and they're going to settle where? Land of Goshen. Okay, they're going to settle there in the land of Goshen. So this famine has spread throughout the whole world. If this famine continues and they don't come to Egypt, what happens? They die. So what happens to Abraham's lineage? It ends. So what is God doing in this? He's right. See, and this is not just a feel-good story about God taking care of Joseph, although he does. There is a greater thing going on in all of this. And it's got to do with God's promise to Abraham that in your seed, all of the nations of the earth will be blessed, and I will give to you a nation. That promise has yet to be fulfilled, though it is getting closer. But if this famine happens and Joseph is not in Egypt opening up the storehouses, what happens to Abraham's descendants? They die, and what happens to the promise? It fails.
Well, and specifically it was to Jacob, not Esau.
Right. Right. This promise that is renewed for Abraham and Isaac and Jacob on down. Right.
Well, the line was not through Joseph.
Right, it's going to be through Judah and not Joseph. Right. All right, so let's get down here to our questions. We talked a little about this. Number one, why was Joseph possibly preferred by Jacob?
Rachel.
He was the son of Rachel, who was Jacob's favorite. And Genesis 29 and Genesis 35 both talk to us about that. We talked about what Joseph's brothers did before selling him to the Midianites. They sat down and ate a meal. We talked about the Ishmaelites. The two men mentioned alongside Joseph in the king's prison are the butler and the baker. What was the interpretation of Pharaoh's dream? You were going to have 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And so it's the idea of preparing for what's to come. A good lesson for us, isn't it? So look at Genesis chapter 39 and verse 3. What does it take to have the Lord with us? In Genesis chapter 39 and in verse 3. Potiphar is going to take note of Joseph, that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. How is it that you and I can make sure we have the Lord with us? Is there something that Joseph did? Is there an attitude that Joseph displayed that is one that we ought to have in our lives that can make sure we have God's presence in our life as well?
When faced with the temptation with Potiphar's wife, he got out.
Okay.
He fled temptation.
Right? Just exactly what Paul, under the inspiration of the Spirit, will say in 1 Corinthians, flee fornication. No doubt he has Joseph in mind when he says that. That's what Joseph is. So here is this attitude of avoiding sin. If we're going to have that sort of attitude and live in that kind of lifestyle, that's a good decision to make to ensure that God is with us. Brother Roach.
And Potiphar saw there was something different about Joseph.
Yes.
They were Joseph was in an idolatrous land. Potiphar undoubtedly had the idols of Egypt. And yet Joseph somehow showed that he worshiped a different God.
Okay. So by the mere conduct that we have that might distinguish ourselves from popular culture. Okay? And ungodly culture.
Joseph did the best he could in the situation he found himself.
Agree with that? He's in difficult situation after difficult situation, but in each one he finds a way to serve and honor God while he's there. Right? He does not use his situation or his hardship as an excuse to do what? As an excuse to sin. Right? Bruce.
He gives God credit for the position that he's in, because when people come to him to interpret dreams, he gives God the credit that he looks to God to interpret the dream. So it's not all his doing.
Very good. Good point. Anyone else? Go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
It makes me think about the verse from Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a strong demonstration of Joseph's work ethic.
Absolutely it is. Good point. What about his comments here in Genesis 39, verses 8 and 9? Mike, this is what you brought up a little bit earlier. What did Joseph's comments in verses 8 and 9 demonstrate about him, his character?
He's loyal.
He's loyal.
He fears God.
Fears God.
Yeah, he's humble, isn't he? He's humble. Yeah, I'm second in command to Potiphar in this house, but I'm still not only under Potiphar, I am under whom? I'm under the Lord. And ultimately, who deserves my obedience? The Lord. So we're seeing obedience, we're seeing loyalty, we're seeing humility. All of these concepts draw us into closer fellowship with God when we direct obedience and humility towards Him. Genesis 39 and verse 3, the Lord caused all that Joseph did to prosper in his hand. Is this a guarantee for servants of God today?
2 Timothy 3:12.
What says what?
Says indeed all who desire to live godly will be persecuted.
Okay. So living a godly life is not a guarantee that we're going to have an easy life. And I think when someone comes here to Genesis 39 and tries to make this case about Joseph like we hear the televangelists sometimes do, it's pretty short-sighted, isn't it? Because where is Joseph? We kind of missed this point. He's enslaved. And where's he about to be? Imprisoned. On what charges? Charges of sexual assault. And then he's going to be left there in that prison for at least 2 years, during which time he thinks he is forgotten by the only man who has any recourse to bring him out. It's a pretty short-sighted view to just pluck out Genesis 39:3 and say, God caused everything in Joseph's hand to prosper. That means whenever you live godly, God's going to bring the blessings upon you, which then means that if you're experiencing hardship in your life, then what?
You're a sinner.
Then you're a sinner. Was that the case for Joseph? Not at all. Was it the case for Paul? It wasn't. Was it the case for Jesus? It wasn't. There has to be something more objective by which we can judge our relationship with God rather than simply the mere externals of this life. And of course, that's where we're turned to God and His Word, and that being the ultimate standard for us. Number 3, think about this. What qualities worthy of repetition do we see in Joseph's life? You read through this story. What are some qualities in the life of Joseph that we need to pluck out and put into play in our lives?
He didn't lose hope.
He didn't lose hope.
I see a lot of Jesus in Joseph, similarities to the situation where being wrongly accused and yet still serving and helping
Sure.
A lot of Jesus qualities that he had that were, I mean, he just, almost like a type. I wouldn't call it a type,
Yeah.
being a type, but it's kind of a,
Sure. Good point.
his whole life.
Bruce?
I would say forgiveness.
Forgiveness, that's a great one.
He stayed with God.
Loyalty.
Did you say be humble?
Humility. I think that's a good one.
So he also have, this, we tend to be, we develop this self-pity when we go into a situation like this. And that really doesn't help much. In his case,
Right.
he has no self-pity about what was happening to him.
Here's where I am, and I'm going to keep serving God wherever I am. I think that's an excellent point. We don't have time to get much into number 4, although I think it's pretty important. McGarvey, if you've ever read that old book, McGarvey's Sermons, he has 2 really good lessons in there about divine providence, one on the life of Esther, one on the life of Joseph. But I would submit to you that perhaps Joseph is not the best example of the idea of God providentially working in our lives today, for the simple reality that Joseph's story and our story are not the same story. Because what is God doing through Joseph? Yeah, we are preserving the Messianic lineage. Now, someone made the point earlier, and you're right, I forgot who it was. Jesus is not coming through Joseph. Right? Who does Jesus come through out of Jacob's children? He's coming through Judah, all right? So the fact that Joseph preserves his brothers alive, particularly Judah, is the means for that Messianic lineage to continue on. That is why I would submit to you that I'm not saying God's providence is not a reality. I believe it is. But I don't know if Joseph is the best example of that, because Joseph's situation and our situation are fundamentally different. What role does Joseph play in unfolding God's plan to save man? And of course, that's it. It's the story of Judah, right? Joseph is going to preserve Judah. And Judah is going to be the one through whom Jesus comes. So in effect, Joseph does what? He plays a role in bringing Jesus into the world. Travis, what do you want to say?
We just need to remember, there's so much we're not told. We don't want to look to the life of Joseph and see almost perfection. And say, I can't live up to that. He had doubts. I know he had struggles. But what I can see is that through that, he maintained his
persevered.
faith and he persevered.
Good point.
To assume that everything was just peachy keen, I think
That doesn't seem to be the picture painted by the text. Good point. Thanks for your attention and your comments this morning.